When a quiet 10-year-old arrives at River Grove Primary each morning, most staff assume she's just well-behaved. But one unsettling detail refuses to fade: the bright red jumper she never takes off. Not in the heat, not during PE, not even when it tears. Today we follow Harper Vance, a teaching assistant whose quiet observation unravels a chilling truth hidden in plain sight. A story of silence, resilience, and the risk it takes to truly see someone. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if you've ever stood up for someone when no one else would. Like this video and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that matter. The fluorescent lights of River Grove Primary hummed their monotonous tune, a sound Harper Vance had long since learned to filter out, replacing it with the everyday soundtrack of childhood: the scrape of chairs, the rustle of worksheets, the distant shouts from the playground carrying through open windows on warmer days. She'd been a teaching assistant here for 5 years, long enough to develop an instinct, a kind of internal radar tuned to the subtle frequencies of distress. She recognized the nervous energy of the kid who hadn't done their homework, the defiant slump of the one who'd had a fight on the bus, the weary droop of the child whose bedtime was routinely ignored. Patterns. Human beings, especially small ones, were creatures of habit and reaction, their inner worlds often leaking out in ways they didn't even realize. Harper had become adept at reading these leaks, the small tells, the deviations from the norm. But Lucy Carmichael, 10 years old and new to River Grove this term, presented a different kind of puzzle. She didn't fit the established patterns. There was no disruptive energy, no obvious sadness, no visible neglect in the usual sense. Her clothes were clean, her hair brushed, her lunchbox packed, albeit with prepackaged efficiency rather than home-cooked care. Lucy was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Polite to a fault, her please and thank you delivered in a hushed monotone that barely registered above the classroom hum. She was good, meticulously good, following instructions precisely, her work neat, her posture unnervingly still. It was a careful, contained goodness, the kind that sometimes served as camouflage, hiding something deeper, something less orderly. What caught Harper's attention, what snagged at the edge of her awareness day after day, wasn't the silence itself. It was the jumper. A bright pillar box red, thick-knit, slightly pilled from wear. Lucy wore it every single day. Not just on chilly mornings, but through sweltering afternoons when the radiators clanked and the sun beat down, turning the classroom into a stuffy greenhouse. Other children shed layers, fanning themselves with worksheets, their faces flushed. Lucy kept the red jumper on, sleeves pulled determinedly down to her knuckles, wrists entirely obscured. She wore it during energetic PE lessons, moving with a stiff, hampered gait. She wore it during messy art projects, refusing smocks with a quiet shake of her head. She even wore it during the designated quiet time after lunch, when the younger grades napped and the older ones read, the slow rotation of the ceiling fans stirring the warm air around her small, unyielding form. At first, Harper dismissed it. A security blanket, perhaps. A beloved item of clothing she couldn't bear to part with. Kids formed intense attachments. But weeks turned into a month, and the red jumper remained a constant, unchanging fixture. It started to feel less like a favorite garment and more like a uniform or maybe even armor. Harper possessed a quiet nature herself, a tendency towards observation honed by years of feeling slightly on the periphery, both as a child and now as an adult navigating the bustling ecosystem of a primary school. She understood the comfort of blending in, of drawing minimal attention. But Lucy's stillness felt different. It felt effortful, maintained at a cost. Harper saw the tension in the set of the girl's shoulders, the way her eyes would dart nervously towards the door whenever it opened unexpectedly, the almost imperceptible flinch if another child bumped her accidentally in the crowded hallway. These were tiny signals easily missed in the daily whirlwind, but Harper collected them, filed them away in the back of her mind where a vague sense of unease began to coalesce. She tried mentioning the jumper casually to Mrs. Dalton, the main classroom teacher, a woman whose energy was perpetually directed towards managing the 30 small personalities in her charge. Mrs. Dalton, juggling permission slips and a looming parents' evening, offered a plausible, practical explanation. Could be a sensory thing, Harper. Some kids just have sensitivities to textures or temperatures, makes them feel secure. Or maybe she just really loves that jumper. Nothing overtly worrying, right? She's doing well academically. No, nothing overtly worrying. Just persistent. Harper nodded, accepting the explanation for now, but the unease lingered, a low hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. She resolved to keep watching, to pay closer attention to the quiet girl in the bright red jumper. The moment that shifted everything, the instant vague concern crystallized into sharp, undeniable alarm. arrived cloaked in the cheerful chaos of an afternoon art lesson. Finger painting. The tables were covered in protective plastic, pots of vibrant paint laid out like jewels, the air thick with the slightly sweet smell of tempera. Most children plunged their hands in with gleeful abandon, smearing colors across thick paper, laughter echoing off the tiled walls. Lucy, however, stood frozen beside her assigned spot, her small hands clenched at her sides, the red sleeves pulled down tight. Harper approached gently, her voice soft, mindful of the girl's reticence. "Hey Lucy, want a smock? It'll keep that lovely jumper clean." Lucy shook her head, a barely perceptible movement, her eyes fixed on the swirling colors on the table. "Okay, how about I help you get started? Maybe just squeeze a little blue onto the paper for you?" Harper reached for the blue paint pot, her movements slow and deliberate. Lucy seemed to hesitate, then slowly, reluctantly, extended one hand towards the paper. But she didn't offer her palm. Instead, she stretched out her fingers, keeping her arms stiff, her wrist angled awkwardly away, clearly trying to prevent the sleeve from riding up even a fraction of an inch. As she leaned forward, the slight tension on the fabric caused the cuff of the red jumper to pull back, just momentarily, just enough. Harper saw it clearly in the bright classroom light, a constellation of bruises, ugly smudges of purple and sickly yellow, arranged in a distinct half-moon pattern across the delicate skin of Lucy's wrist. They looked like fingerprints. Harper felt a cold fist clench in her stomach, the cheerful noise of the classroom suddenly fading to a distant buzz. She forced her face to remain neutral, her voice calm. "Here we go," she murmured, squeezing a blob of blue paint onto the paper, deliberately avoiding looking at Lucy's wrist again. She moved on quickly, attending to another child, but the image was seared into her mind. The shape of those bruises. The way Lucy had tried so desperately to keep them hidden. The red jumper wasn't armor against the outside world, it was a shield, a desperate attempt to conceal the evidence of harm. That night, sleep offered Harper no refuge. The image of those bruises played on a loop behind her closed eyelids, superimposed over Lucy's small, anxious face, her hunched shoulders, her studied silence. The careful goodness, the unwavering politeness, the constant presence of the red jumper. It all snapped into horrifying focus. These weren't quirks, they were symptoms. Symptoms of fear, of hiding, of trying desperately to be small and invisible to avoid provoking what? Or whom? The question hung heavy and menacing in the darkness of her small apartment. Harper Vance lived a quiet life, one largely defined by the rhythms of the school year and the needs of other people's children. Her small, tidy flat above a bakery often smelled faintly of yeast and sugar in the mornings. She had moved to River Grove 5 years ago after a relationship dissolved, seeking a fresh start in a town where she knew no one. The job as a teaching assistant had been a lifeline, offering routine and purpose, though sometimes the sheer volume of youthful energy left her feeling drained, highlighting the stillness of her own existence. She wasn't unhappy exactly, but a persistent sense of unfulfillment sometimes gnawed at her during the long evenings or quiet weekends. She poured her care and attention into the children at school, perhaps partly compensating for the family she didn't have. She knew the names of their pets, their favorite superheroes, the anxieties they carried home with them. She was the one who noticed the too thin coats in winter, the lunches that consisted only of sugary snacks, the shadows under eyes that spoke of troubled sleep. Mrs. Dalton, experienced and pragmatic, often relied on Harper's quieter observations, her ability to connect with the children who slipped through the cracks of a busy classroom. Harper's empathy was her strength, but also her vulnerability. She felt the children's anxieties keenly, their small hurts echoing within her own reservoirs of past loneliness. Lucy Carmichael's arrival had subtly shifted the atmosphere. The girl's pervasive quietness, the ever-present red jumper, the underlying tension Harper sensed, it had become a focal point for Harper's innate concern. Now, armed with the chilling visual of the bruises, that concern morphed into a gnawing urgency. The core conflict wasn't just about Lucy anymore, it was about Harper's own conscience warring with the cautious protocols of the system. She knew the rules, the burden of proof required for official intervention. Suspicions weren't enough. A single sighting of bruises, however suggestive, could be explained away. But her gut, honed by years of observation, screamed that this was more than an accident. The following morning, fueled by restless anxiety and black coffee, Harper arrived at school before the first bell. The hallways were still dim and silent, smelling of floor polish and anticipation. Using the staff login, she accessed the school's digital record system, her heart thudding guiltily, feeling like a spy. Lucy Carmichael's file was sparse. Enrolled 3 months prior. Emergency contact listed as Sharon Lane, identifying herself as Lucy's aunt and legal guardian. No mention of parents, deceased or otherwise. The address provided was on the older side of town, a cul-de-sac Harper vaguely recognized. The contact phone number looked hastily added, scrawled in blue ink in the margin, different from the typed information elsewhere. Harper cross-referenced it with the school's call log. No outgoing calls made to that number since enrollment. No record of Sharon Lane attending parent meetings or school events. Again, not necessarily sinister in itself. Guardians could be busy, overwhelmed, perhaps just not engaged with the school community. But coupled with the bruises, the jumper, the fear, it painted a picture of isolation, of a child potentially falling through the cracks, overseen by an adult who seemed peripheral at best. Later that day, during silent reading time, Harper noticed a small tear near the cuff of Lucy's red jumper, the knitted fabric snagged and unraveling slightly. Choosing her moment carefully, when the classroom was quiet and Mrs. Dalton was occupied at her desk, Harper knelt beside Lucy's chair. "Hey sweetie," she whispered, keeping her voice light, "I saw your jumper has a little tear. Do you want me to see if I can stitch it up for you later? Maybe in the staff room?" Lucy froze. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with a stark terror that went far beyond a simple snagged thread. Her breath hitched. "I can't. I'm not supposed to take it off. Not ever." The words tumbled out in a rushed whisper, choked with fear. "Even if it rips. He said people will ask questions. And then everything will get worse." Not her aunt? The pronoun hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Harper felt ice slide down her spine. "Who said that, Lucy? Who told you not to take it off?" But the moment of openness, fragile as it was, had passed. Lucy clamped her mouth shut, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting immediate retribution. She physically shrank back in her chair, pulling her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms tightly around them, the torn sleeve hidden once more. The conversation was over, the door slammed shut, but Lucy had given Harper the peace she needed. The fear wasn't just about bruises, it was about exposure, about consequences dictated by an unnamed he. This was no longer suspicion, it was a certainty echoing in the terrified silence of a 10-year-old girl. The formal safeguarding report felt both necessary and terrifyingly inadequate. Harper detailed her observations meticulously. The jumper, the bruises, Lucy's withdrawn behavior, the fear-laced whisper about not taking the jumper off, the mention of he. She submitted it through the official channels, discussing it again with a now visibly concerned Mrs. Dalton and Mr. Henderson, the school counselor. Mr. Henderson, a kind man burdened by an overwhelming caseload and the slow grind of bureaucracy, listened patiently, nodding gravely. "Thank you for bringing this forward, Harper. This is concerning. The mention of he, and the explicit instruction not to remove clothing despite injury definitely elevates this. We'll escalate it immediately. A home visit request will be filed with social services." The process, however, was frustratingly slow. Social services were stretched thin. A non-emergency home visit could take a week, maybe longer, to schedule. A week. Harper felt a surge of helpless frustration. A week felt like an eternity when picturing Lucy trapped in whatever situation caused those bruises, living under the fear of him. What could happen in a week? The system, designed to protect, often moved with agonizing deliberation, demanding concrete proof while potential harm continued behind closed doors. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that waiting passively for the official wheels to turn was a gamble she wasn't willing to take with Lucy's safety. The need to do something, anything, gnawed at her. That evening, after the staff meeting had dragged on, Harper found herself driving towards the address listed in Lucy's file. She told herself it was just to get a feel for the neighborhood, to contextualize the situation. The cul-de-sac was quiet, lined with modest houses settling into the early evening twilight. Lucy's house, number 17, sat at the very end, slightly isolated, partially obscured by an overgrown hedge. It looked neglected. The paint was peeling in places, the small patch of front lawn was patchy and brown, and the curtains in all the visible windows were tightly drawn, presenting a blank, unwelcoming facade. There were no bikes on the lawn, no toys scattered on the porch, none of the usual chaotic signs of childhood occupancy. It felt unnervingly still, secretive. Harper parked her car down the street, under the shade of a large oak tree, feeling like a low-budget private eye, her heart thumping with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. She just needed to see something. An hour crawled by. Lights flickered on inside the house, casting muted yellow squares onto the drawn blinds, but nothing else happened. Just as she was about to give up, Convincing herself this was foolish and potentially reckless, the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in dark work clothes, his face obscured by the deepening shadows and the brim of a baseball cap. He lit a cigarette, the orange tip glowing brightly in the dusk, smoked it quickly, impatiently, pacing the small concrete slab of the porch like a caged animal. He scanned the street briefly, his gaze sweeping past Harper's parked car without pausing, before grinding the cigarette out under his heel and disappearing back inside, shutting the door firmly behind him. Harper fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking slightly, and managed to snap a blurry photo of his retreating back just before the door closed. It wasn't much, but it was him. The he Lucy feared. He existed. He lived there. And he looked nothing like the kind, maternal aunt figure Harper might have vaguely pictured. The next day Lucy wasn't at school. Her chair sat empty, a stark void in the otherwise bustling classroom. Harper felt a knot of dread tighten in her chest. Mrs. Dalton marked her absent, assuming illness. But when Lucy didn't appear the following day either, and the school's attempts to call the number on file went straight to a generic, non-personalized voicemail, the dread solidified into cold, hard fear. No explanation. No message. Just silence. The carefully constructed wall of routine and procedure suddenly felt like a flimsy barrier against a gathering storm. Lucy was missing from the one place Harper knew she had at least some measure of visibility, however small. Harper couldn't wait any longer. The 2 days of unexplained absence, coupled with everything else she knew and feared, tipped the scales from cautious procedure to urgent intervention. She bypassed the usual channels, going straight to Mr. Henderson's office, her voice tight with controlled panic. "She's not here, Mr. Henderson. 2 days now. No call, no answer, straight to voicemail. After what she said, after what I saw, we have to do something now. Please." Mr. Henderson saw the raw fear in Harper's eyes, heard the conviction in her voice. The bureaucratic inertia seemed to momentarily dissolve in the face of genuine alarm. He picked up his phone, making a direct call to his contact at Child Protective Services, explaining the situation. The documented concerns, the bruises, the fear, the unexplained absence, the unresponsive contact number. He then called the local police department, requesting an immediate welfare check based on suspected child endangerment and potential unlawful restraint, given Lucy's terrified whisper about not being allowed to remove clothing. Harper waited outside his office, pacing the quiet corridor, twisting her hands together. Every tick of the institutional clock on the wall sounded unnaturally loud, each second stretching into an agonizing minute. It felt like hours passed, though it was likely less than one before Mr. Henderson emerged, his face pale and grim. "They went, Harper. Police and a social worker. They just called back." Harper held her breath. They found her. Lucy was there. Alone. Locked in her bedroom from the outside. The house was empty otherwise. Harper swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe for support. Alone? Locked in? What about the aunt? Sharon Lane? Apparently, the man Harper had seen, who identified himself only as a friend of Sharon's staying there temporarily, arrived home while the police were still on scene. His story was thin, evasive. He claimed Sharon had needed to go out of town suddenly, asked him to watch Lucy. Said she'd be back any day now. But he had no contact number for her, couldn't say where she'd gone or why. He seemed agitated, hostile, particularly when questioned about locking the bedroom door. Claimed it was faulty, that Lucy must have locked herself in accidentally. No one believed him. While one officer questioned the man, the social worker spoke gently with Lucy. Piecing together the fragmented, fearful account from the child, combined with the man's suspicious behavior and the state of the house, the picture became alarmingly clear. Sharon Lane hadn't just gone out of town. She hadn't shown up for her cleaning job in nearly 2 weeks. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Neighbors hadn't seen her. The man couldn't provide any verifiable details about her supposed trip. Within hours, Sharon Lane was officially reported as a missing person. The man, whose identity was confirmed and flagged for prior minor offenses, was detained for questioning regarding child endangerment and potentially Sharon's disappearance, though concrete evidence linking him to her vanishing was initially lacking. And Lucy? Lucy was removed from the house immediately, placed into emergency foster care. Safe. Physically safe at least. Harper finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for weeks. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy, followed swiftly by a profound wave of sorrow for the little girl who had endured so much in silence, whose aunt was now missing, leaving her utterly adrift. The he had been neutralized, the immediate danger contained by the system Harper had both railed against and relied upon. But the emotional fallout, the deep scars left on a 10-year-old girl, were only just beginning to surface. Harper went home that evening to her quiet flat, the silence usually a comfort now feeling vast and empty. She replayed every interaction with Lucy, every hesitant glance, every whispered word, the image of the red jumper a persistent, painful symbol. She thought of the empty house, the locked door, the missing aunt, the unnamed man whose casual presence masked such potential darkness. She had done the right thing, pushed the system, helped bring Lucy into the light. But the victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the trauma Lucy had suffered and the uncertainty of her future. Sleep was impossible again, her mind racing, consumed by thoughts of the small, quiet girl now navigating the bewildering world of foster care, alone in a stranger's house, the red jumper her only familiar anchor. The following week at River Grove Primary felt strangely muted. The vibrant energy of the classroom seemed dimmed without Lucy's quiet, intense presence. Harper found herself instinctively glancing towards the empty desk near the window, a pang hitting her each time she registered the vacancy. A half-finished drawing Lucy had been working on, a fantastical landscape with soaring birds and hidden tree houses, remained tucked in her cubby, a poignant reminder of the child's hidden inner world. Harper tried to focus on the other children, on the routine tasks of assisting Mrs. Dalton, handing out worksheets, supervising playtime, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Lucy. She exchanged brief, hushed updates with Mr. Henderson. Lucy was physically unharmed, settled into an experienced emergency foster home. She was quiet, withdrawn, but cooperating with the social workers. The investigation into Sharon Lane's disappearance was ongoing, grim possibilities hanging unspoken in the air. The man questioned had been released pending further investigation, citing lack of direct evidence linking him to Sharon's vanishing, though the endangerment charges related to Lucy remained. It felt deeply unsatisfying, the complex gears of justice grinding slowly while a child's life remained in limbo. Harper felt a persistent ache, a sense of unfinished business, a connection to Lucy that transcended her professional role. Then, one rain-slicked morning, Mr. Henderson intercepted Harper as she was heading towards the staff room, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Harper, can I have a word? There's been a development. Something unexpected." He led her into his small, cluttered office, closing the door behind them. "It's about Lucy," he began, pausing as if unsure how to phrase it. "She's spoken to her social worker. She's made a request." Harper frowned, bracing herself for difficult news. "A request? What kind of request?" Mr. Henderson met her gaze directly. "She's asked if she can come and stay with you, Harper." The words hung in the quiet office, stunning Harper into silence. With her? She thought of her small flat, her solitary routine, her utter lack of experience as a parent. It seemed impossible, impractical. Yet, deep within the sudden turmoil of logistical concerns and self-doubt, a fierce, protective warmth flared. A clear, unwavering instinct cut through the noise. It wasn't a decision reached through careful deliberation. It was an immediate, visceral response. The path forward wasn't simple. There were protocols, assessments, background checks, endless forms. Foster care licensing was a rigorous process, not undertaken lightly. But Harper didn't hesitate. "Yes," she told Mr. Henderson, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, I'll do whatever is needed. Tell them yes." The ensuing weeks became a blur of paperwork, interviews, home visits, and background checks. Harper navigated the system with a quiet determination fueled by the image of Lucy's small, hopeful face relayed to her by the social worker. She answered invasive questions honestly, allowed strangers to scrutinize her life, her finances, her motivations. She bought a small bed, cleared space in her spare room, painted the walls a soft, calming blue. She worried constantly about her adequacy, about the depth of Lucy's trauma, about the uncertain future, about the ongoing investigation into Sharon's disappearance. But beneath the anxiety ran a current of profound rightness, a sense that this was exactly where she needed to be, what she needed to do. Finally, after weeks that felt like months, the approval came through. Lucy arrived on a gray Saturday morning, carrying a single small backpack and wearing the same bright red jumper, now clean but still bearing the faint unrepaired tear at the cuff. She stood hesitantly on Harper's doorstep, clutching the backpack straps, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Harper kept her voice soft, her movements slow. "Welcome home, Lucy," she said, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. The first few days were tentative, fragile. Lucy barely spoke, moving through the small flat like a ghost, her silence heavy with unspoken fear and grief. Harper didn't push. She created space, offered quiet companionship, maintained a simple, predictable routine. Meals were eaten together at the small kitchen table, evenings were spent reading side by side on the sofa, bedtime involved leaving the hallway light on and Lucy's bedroom door slightly ajar. The red jumper remained firmly in place, a constant, visible symbol of the invisible wounds Lucy carried. Harper never mentioned it, never suggested she take it off. She waited, offering patience as a silent promise. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning about a week after Lucy had arrived, Harper walked into the kitchen to make breakfast and stopped dead. Folded neatly, placed squarely in the center of the small kitchen table, was the bright red jumper. Harper's breath caught. She turned slowly. Lucy stood in the hallway doorway watching her. She was wearing a plain gray t-shirt Harper had bought for her, her thin arms bare, the faint, faded remnants of old bruises visible on her wrists in the morning light. She looked small, vulnerable, but her gaze was steady, holding Harper's. Lucy didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there, bathed in the soft glow filtering through the kitchen window. Then, in a small, quiet voice, barely more than a whisper, she asked, "Is this okay?" Harper felt tears prick her eyes, a wave of emotion, relief, sorrow, overwhelming love, washing over her. She nodded, her own voice thick. "Yes, sweetie. That's more than okay. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this.